It's 1445 BC. Thousands of people have surrounded two men, ready to crush them with giant rocks. But these aren't villains. They're the only heroes brave enough to tell the truth. Before a single stone is thrown, a terrifying cloud descends from the heavens. God has arrived, and he's even more furious than the mob. But here's the twist. He's not angry because of the violence. He's disgusted by their cowardice. Why was an entire nation so terrified of the giants in Canaan that they'd rather murder their own leaders than face the truth? Why were they so afraid? Just 40 days earlier, 12 men walked into a land flowing with milk and honey. But instead of seeing God's promise, 10 of them saw a nightmare. They looked at the Anakim, the mysterious giants of the land, and then they looked at themselves. They returned to Moses with a report that would haunt an entire nation. They said, "We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them." This is what I call the grasshopper syndrome. It wasn't just about the physical height of their enemies. It was about a total collapse of identity and faith. Think about it for a second. These were the same people who watched the Red Sea part. They saw the plagues of Egypt with their own eyes. Yet standing before these massive Canaanite walls, they forgot the power of the one standing behind them. They let their fear of the physical world blind them to the spiritual reality. This cowardice was so infectious that the entire nation broke down in tears, even wishing they were back in slavery in Egypt rather than facing the giants. God's response was devastatingly simple. He gave them exactly what they asked for. Since they were too afraid to enter the land, they would never enter it. For 40 years, an entire generation was forced to wander in circles in the wilderness until every man who lacked the courage to fight had passed away. God was waiting for a new generation to rise, a generation born in the harshness of the wilderness, hardened by the elements, and most importantly, a generation that didn't know how to be afraid of giants. This wasn't just a punishment, it was a purification. God was weeding out the grasshopper mentality so that when his people finally crossed that border, they wouldn't just be refugees, they would be conquerors. 40 years later, the wait was over. Joshua, the man who had refused to be a grasshopper 4 decades earlier, was now the leader. But crossing the Jordan River wasn't just a tactical move. It was an invasion of a spiritual death zone. You see, Joshua wasn't leading his men into a vacant lot. He was marching them directly into the heart of an ancient supernatural stronghold. This brings us to a place that often gets overlooked, but it's crucial for understanding the book of Joshua, the Gate of Bashan. Many people wonder why these giants were so concentrated in Canaan. The answer lies in the north, in a region called Bashan. This was the kingdom of Og, the last of the Refaim giants, a man whose bed was famously over 13 feet long. In the culture of the ancient Near East, Bashan wasn't just a province. It was known as the Gate of the Underworld. Ancient people believed these specific mountains were a portal where supernatural entities entered our realm. When Joshua attacked this region, he wasn't just claiming territory. He was dismantling the oldest spiritual fortresses of the fallen angels. Even today, if you visit the Golan Heights in the region of Bashan, you'll find something truly chilling: Gilgal Refaim. It's a massive prehistoric stone structure made of 5 concentric rings containing over 40,000 tons of basalt rocks. Secular archaeologists call it the Wheel of the Giants. These stones are so massive that no ordinary human force of that time could have moved or positioned them. This wasn't just a random location, it was a spiritual landmark. Joshua's mission was clear. He had to clear this death zone to make room for a holy zone. He wasn't just a general, he was a spiritual cleanser. Every step he took toward the city of Jericho was a step into a land infected by the dark legacy of the Nephilim. The Israelites weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting to close the gates that had been open for centuries. But as they approached the towering walls of Jericho, walls likely built by the very giants they feared, Joshua realized that brute force wouldn't be enough. He needed a strategy that defied human logic. And that's when he encountered a figure that would change the course of history. Finally, the 40 years were up. The old generation had passed away, and Joshua led a new battle-hardened nation to the banks of the Jordan River. But you have to understand, this wasn't just a tactical crossing into a vacant lot. Joshua was leading them straight into what I call a spiritual death zone. Many people ask me in the comments why these giants were so concentrated in the land of Canaan specifically. To find the answer, we have to look north, to a place called Bashan. In the ancient Near East, Bashan was more than just a province. It was the kingdom of Og, a giant whose iron bed was famously over 13 feet long. But the name Bashan itself carried a terrifying weight in the ancient world. It was known as the Gate of the Underworld. Ancient cultures believed these mountains were a portal, a literal place where supernatural entities could cross from their realm into ours. When Joshua led his army across the Jordan, he wasn't just grabbing territory, he was dismantling the oldest, most entrenched spiritual fortresses of the fallen angels. If you visit the Golan Heights in the region of Bashan today, you'll find a site that still baffles archaeologists. Gilgal Refaim. It's a massive prehistoric stone structure made of 5 concentric rings, using over 40,000 tons of basalt rock. The local legends call it the Wheel of the Giants. These stones are so massive that no human technology of that time should have been able to move or position them. It wasn't built as a simple burial ground, it was a spiritual landmark, a monument to the power of the giants. By crossing the Jordan, Joshua was essentially declaring war on the gatekeepers of the underworld. He was clearing out a spiritual infection to make way for a holy nation. But as they approached their first target, the fortress of Jericho, the challenge became very physical. How do you bring down walls that were likely reinforced by giant hands? Before the first arrow was even fired at Jericho, Joshua went out alone to scout the city. That's when he saw him. A man was standing there with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua asked a simple, direct question: "Are you for us or for our enemies?" The man's response changed everything. "No, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Joshua immediately fell on his face in worship. Now, did you catch that? Normally in the Bible, when someone tries to worship an angel, the angel stops them immediately. But this commander accepted it. In fact, he told Joshua to take off his sandals because the ground he was standing on was holy. Does that sound familiar? It's the exact same command God gave to Moses at the burning bush 40 years earlier. This wasn't just an angel. Many theologians believe this was a Christophany, a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ himself as a man of war. I could honestly spend a whole video just on these mysterious appearances. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd want to see. The strategy this divine commander gave was strange, to say the least. No battering rams, no siege towers, no tunnels. Just marching. For 6 days, the army was told to circle the city in total silence. Can you imagine the tension? On the 7th day, they gave a massive shout, and those towering walls built to keep out anyone and anything, collapsed flat to the ground. But what happened next is what sends chills down the spine of us as modern readers. God commanded the Israelites to leave no one alive. Men, women, children, everything was to be destroyed. Does that bother you? It's a question I see all the time. If God is a God of love, how can he command what looks like genocide? But to understand this, we have to look through a different lens. This wasn't ethnic cleansing, it was spiritual surgery. Think of the Nephilim bloodline like a supernatural virus infecting the human DNA. Unlike regular people who had the capacity to repent, these specific inhabitants were the offspring of a demonic rebellion, entities that had permanently rejected the light. If Joshua didn't cut the infection out completely, it would spread, corrupting the entire human race and potentially blocking the future birth of the Savior. It's a painful paradox. Sometimes the greatest mercy for the future of humanity requires absolute severity toward evil in the present. God wasn't acting out of hatred for a race, but out of a need to protect the holy seed promised to Adam. Like a surgeon removing a gangrenous limb to save the life of the patient, Joshua was performing a desperate operation to prevent the world from becoming a kingdom of demonic hybrids. But as they moved on from the smoking ruins of Jericho, they were about to learn that even one small act of hidden disobedience could bring their entire mission to a crashing halt. After the impossible victory at Jericho, you'd think the Israelites were unstoppable. They had the divine commander on their side and the momentum of a miracle. But their next battle wasn't against a massive fortress of giants. It was against a tiny, insignificant town called Ai. Joshua sent spies to scout the place, and they came back with great news. They told him, "Don't wear out the whole army. Ai is small. 2 or 3 thousand men are more than enough to take it." So Joshua sent a small force, expecting an easy win. But for the first time since crossing the Jordan, something went horribly wrong. The men of Ai didn't just fight back. They chased the Israelites away and killed 36 men. Joshua was devastated. He tore his clothes and fell face first before the ark of the Lord until evening. He asked the question we all ask when things fall apart. "Lord, why did you bring us this far just to let us be destroyed?" But God's response to Joshua was blunt. He said, "Get up. Why are you lying on your face? Israel has sinned." You see, at Jericho, God had placed everything under Kerem, the law of total destruction or devotion to him. But one man named Achan saw a beautiful Babylonian robe, some silver, and a bar of gold, and he couldn't help himself. He stole them and hid them under his tent. To us, it looks like a simple case of theft, but in the context of this spiritual war, it was much more dangerous. By bringing those items into the camp, Achan hadn't just stolen property, he had brought a spiritual infection into the nation's DNA. In a mission to cleanse the land of demonic legacies and Nephilim influence, even a single thread of compromise was like a virus. Achan had essentially invited the very darkness they were supposed to be destroying right into the heart of his family. Achan's choice didn't just affect him, it brought judgment on his entire household and weakened the whole nation. It's a sobering reminder that our secret sins never stay private. They always have a ripple effect on the people we love. This connection between our ancestors, our bloodlines, and our identity is something that has always fascinated me. We all want to know where we truly come from and what legacy is hidden in our own DNA. That's actually why I wanted to get the most accurate answer possible about my own heritage. As many of you know, both my grandparents came from Mexico, so I've always assumed my roots were pretty straightforward, but I decided to use this $29 DNA kit from MyHeritage, the sponsor of today's video, to see the full picture. The results were actually incredible. I found out I'm 64% Mexican, but I also have Spanish, Portuguese, and even Central African roots. It's amazing to see how my family's journey across the world is written right there in my genetic code. MyHeritage makes this process so easy and affordable. Right now, they're running a special promotion just for you guys. If you click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen and use the code ETH, you can get your own DNA kit for just $29. It's a lower price than their competitors, and they have a strict privacy policy to ensure your data stays secure. It's a great way to discover the stories of the people who came before you. After Joshua discovered what Achan had done, the consequences were severe. Achan and his entire family were taken to a valley and stoned to death. It's a brutal ending that often shocks us, but it shows how serious God was about keeping the bloodline of his people pure. Once the infection was removed, God's anger was lifted, and Joshua was able to devise a new, brilliant battle plan to finally take the city of Ai. But as they continued their conquest, they were about to encounter a miracle that would defy the laws of physics and leave the rest of the world in total shock. With the internal infection of Achan finally removed, Joshua was ready to face his greatest challenge yet. But this time, it wasn't just one city. 5 Canaanite kings, likely descendants of the massive Gibborim, had joined forces to crush Joshua's new allies at Gibeon. The Gibeonites sent a desperate plea for help, and Joshua didn't hesitate. He led his army on a grueling, all-night march from Gilgal, climbing nearly 4,000 feet in elevation to catch the enemy by surprise at dawn. The battle was chaotic and brutal. As the 5 armies began to flee, the Bible tells us that God intervened directly, raining down massive hailstones that killed more soldiers than the Israelite swords did. But then, something happened that defies everything we know about physics. Joshua realized the sun was setting, and if darkness fell, the remnant of these giant-led armies would escape to fight another day. In the heat of the moment, Joshua did something bold. He looked up at the sky and commanded the sun to stand still over Gibeon and the moon over the valley of Ajalon. And the Bible records that the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. Now I know what you're thinking. Is this just a poetic legend? How could the earth stop spinning without everything flying off into space? Well, if the God who created billions of galaxies wants to keep the lights on a little longer, he certainly has the power to do it. But check this out. This isn't just a Bible story. Ancient records from the other side of the world tell a strikingly similar story. In ancient Mexico, the natives recorded a long night, where the moon stood still and the sun delayed its rising. At the same time, ancient Chinese annals from the reign of Emperor Yao mention a long day where the sun didn't set for 10 days. These accounts from different continents, written around the same historical window, point to a global celestial event that matches Joshua's long day perfectly. But why did God go to such extreme lengths? Why break the laws of the universe just for one battle? It's because of who they were fighting. These 5 kings weren't just men. They were the guardians of the Nephilim strongholds in the south. To let them escape was to let the demonic infection survive. If you still find this hard to believe, you need to look at the physical evidence left behind in the soil of Canaan. Archaeologists have uncovered something about 50 miles from this battle site that secular science struggles to explain. Massive bronze spearheads. Look at this. A typical ancient spearhead is about 6 to 8 inches long, but the ones found here? They are a staggering 26 inches long. That's nearly the size of a modern sword, just for the tip of the spear. Secular scholars often dismiss these as ceremonial decorations, arguing they would be far too heavy for any normal man to carry, let alone throw in the heat of combat. But there's one detail they can't explain away. These massive spearheads show clear signs of battle wear. They are chipped, blunted, and worn down exactly where a weapon would strike a shield or armor. These weren't sitting on a shelf in a temple. They were used in war. This proves that there were people in this land, the Gibborim, who had the immense strength and size to wield weapons that would be impossible for you or me to lift. Joshua wasn't just fighting a war for land. He was fighting a war against a race of giants who were literally built for destruction. But where did these mysterious beings come from? And why does the Bible link them to a racy, forbidden secret from the days of Noah? To understand that, we have to look at the most controversial chapter in the entire book of Joshua. But here is the million-dollar question. If God flooded the whole world in the days of Noah specifically to get rid of this evil, how were there giants waiting for Joshua 400 years later? To find the answer, we have to go back to Genesis chapter 6. The Bible says that before the flood, the sons of God, which most ancient scholars believed were fallen angels, came into the daughters of men and bore children to them. These children were the Nephilim. The name itself literally means those who have fallen or those who cause others to fall. Many of you have asked me in the comments how they survived the global flood. The Bible doesn't give us a detailed technical manual, but it does drop a very specific clue. It says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. Some theologians suggest that fallen angels committed this same act again after the flood. Others believe that the genetic traits were carried through the wife of Ham, Noah's son. Either way, by the time Joshua reached Canaan, the infection had returned. The land was crawling with them. In ancient Greek or Sumerian myths, these half-god, half-human beings were celebrated. Think of Hercules or Gilgamesh. They were the heroes of the ancient world. But the Bible uses a different word for them, Gibborim, which means mighty ones or warriors. This is where we see a massive paradox of heroes. In secular mythology, being a demigod makes you an idol to be worshipped. But in the Bible, these Gibborim were a nightmare. Their strength came from a rebellion against God's natural order. They were temperamental, violent, and used their superhuman power to enslave and terrorize everyone around them. Joshua wasn't just fighting monsters in a fairy tale. He was Lat Joe overthrowing a global system that worshipped brute force and divine human hybrids. While the rest of the world looked at the Gibborim with awe and envy, God looked at them with holy indignation. Joshua was proving that a nation of chow chow, grasshoppers, who trusted in the Creator was more powerful than a nation of giants who trusted in their own corrupted DNA. But this next part is what really changed the way I look at the spiritual world. What happens to the spirit of a giant when they die? Ancient Jewish texts, and even many modern scholars, believe this is the true origin of demons. As a human being, you have a spirit that continues to live on into eternity. But because the Nephilim were an unclean union between the divine and the human, their spirits were considered unclean spirits. When Joshua's sword fell and their physical bodies were destroyed, these spirits didn't just disappear. Because they were part spirit, they remained. But they were homeless. They were disembodied spirits wandering the earth, forever seeking a physical body to inhabit so they could once again experience the world they lost. This is exactly what we call demons today. Think about that for a second. The unclean spirits that Jesus cast out in the New Testament, those spirits that were so terrified of being sent to the abyss, were likely the disembodied spirits of the Gibborim that Joshua had defeated centuries earlier. Joshua was dealing with the physical giants, but he was also indirectly populating the spiritual realm with these line, unclean spirits. The book of Joshua makes so much more sense when you realize it wasn't just about land. It was a spiritual cleansing, a literal surgery to remove these demonic gatekeepers before the true hero Jesus could eventually arrive. But even after all those battles, the job wasn't finished. There was one giant who was left behind, one who would eventually face a young shepherd boy. Did you know that Joshua's name in Hebrew is actually Yeshua? It's the exact same name as Jesus. This isn't a coincidence. Joshua was a shadow of the ultimate commander who was yet to come. While Joshua led a physical army to cleanse a physical land, Jesus came to lead a spiritual revolution to cleanse the human heart. Today, we aren't facing 10-foot-tall warriors with bronze spears, but that doesn't mean the battle is over. The homeless spirits we discussed, those ancient Lin, are still looking for a way in. Often, they manifest as the giants of depression, anxiety, and trauma that take up residence in our minds. To the subscriber who reached out in the comments about their struggle with depression, please know that you are not fighting alone. Just as God told Joshua, "Do not be afraid," he says the same to you. The same Yeshua who conquered the Nephilim is ready to help you conquer the darkness in your life. Joshua won the war, but a few giants managed to escape to the coast. One of their descendants would eventually step onto a battlefield to face a humble shepherd. To see how that final showdown played out, click this video here to learn about David and the last of the giants. And remember to check the link in the description for your MyHeritage DNA kit. I'll see you in the next one.